I thought I was just dealing with a resentful mother-in-law, but by dawn I was fleeing for my life as the perfect pawn in a dangerous, organized scheme. My husband wasn't protecting me from a family feud. He was setting me up to take the fall for a heavy criminal charge that would have cost me my freedom forever. The humidity in the kitchen was thick enough to choke on, smelling of burnt rosemary and my mother-in-law's poisonous resentment. Linda had been staying with us for 3 weeks, and in those 21 days, my marriage had begun to fray at the seams. It started with her helpful comments about my career, moved on to her rearranging our furniture to suit her feng shui obsession, and ended tonight with her throwing my late mother's jewelry box across the room, claiming it was tacky junk that didn't belong in a respectable household. My husband, Mark, had stood there, his face a mask of conflict. When I finally snapped and told her to pack her bags, she didn't just cry. She performed a full-scale emotional collapse. She clutched her chest, gasped for air, and muttered something about unforgivable betrayal. Mark, panicked and white-faced, didn't defend me. Instead, he shoved me toward the hallway. "Get your bag," he barked, his eyes darting around as if the walls themselves were listening. "We're leaving. Right now. The coast, the summer house. It's the only place we'll be safe from this mess." I was confused. Why would a family argument require an emergency evacuation to the seaside at 2 a.m? But Mark wasn't the man I knew. His hands were shaking so violently he dropped his keys twice before starting the engine. He didn't take the highway. He took back roads, weaving through the dark, mountainous passes as if we were being pursued by ghosts. Every time I tried to ask what was happening, he just gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned translucent. "Don't talk," he whispered. "Don't use your phone. Don't look back." By dawn, we were pulling into the desolate gravel lot of a private airfield, not the summer house. My stomach dropped. I realized then that my suitcase, which I'd packed in a blur of adrenaline, contained not just clothes, but folders of documents I'd never seen before, tucked away in the side pockets by Mark's frantic hands. We sprinted across the tarmac toward a small chartered jet that looked far too expensive for a man who worked in mid-level accounting. "Mark, what is this?" I screamed, the wind whipping my hair. "Whose plane is this? And why are you acting like we're fugitives?" He stopped, turning to face me. The look in his eyes wasn't love or even guilt. It was raw, unadulterated fear. "You don't understand, Clara. My mother isn't just a bitter woman. She's the head of a massive organized scheme. I've been trying to get us out for years, but she wouldn't let me leave without paying a price. She tipped off the authorities. She told them I was involved in an attempt to break my life with a heavy criminal charge. She told them I was keeping illegal weapons in the garage, and if they search this house, they'll find enough evidence to put me away for an enormous term. We have to go, or the Internal Security Service will take us both." I felt the ground tilt beneath me. Everything I thought I knew about our life, our modest savings, our quiet weekends, was a lie. Just as I opened my mouth to demand the truth, a man in a neon yellow janitor's uniform, pushing a mop bucket toward the hangar, slowed his pace. He didn't look at us. He stared straight ahead at his bucket, his voice a low, raspy murmur that carried perfectly on the morning breeze. "Don't get on that plane," the cleaner muttered, his eyes darting toward a black sedan idling at the edge of the perimeter. "The Internal Security Service is already waiting at the arrival gate in the city you're headed to, and that plane, it's not yours. It's part of a setup to move packets with substances across the border. If you take one step onto that ramp, you aren't escaping, ma'am. You're signing your death warrant." The cleaner's words hit me with the force of a physical blow. The mop bucket rattled as he pushed it past us, his movement so mundane, so practiced, that he looked like just another worker clocking out. I froze, my foot hovering inches from the bottom step of the plane's ladder. Mark, however, didn't stop. He was halfway up the stairs, his back to me, shouting for me to hurry. "Clara, move! If we don't clear the airspace in 10 minutes, we're done," he yelled, his voice cracking with desperation. He didn't hear the cleaner. He didn't see the way the man had looked at me, not with malice, but with a terrifying, hollow pity. "Mark, stop!" I shrieked, grabbing the metal railing. The pilot, a man whose face was obscured by a deep cap, looked out the cockpit window, his expression unreadable, waiting for the signal to throttle up. I looked back at the cleaner, who was now 30 yards away, hunched over his mop. I felt a cold sweat prickle my scalp. If the Internal Security Service was waiting for us at the destination, and this plane was a transport for those packets with substances, then Mark hadn't been protecting me. He had been using me. I was the perfect cover, the unsuspecting wife, the innocent luggage carrier. I jerked my hand away from the plane as if the metal were burning. Mark turned around, his face twisting into something I didn't recognize. The mask of the panicked husband had fallen away, replaced by the cold, calculating gaze of someone who had lived a double life for far too long. "Get on the plane, Clara," he said, his voice dropping an octave, losing its frantic edge. "You don't get a choice anymore. The authorities are on their way here, not just at the destination. If you stay on the ground, you're the one holding the bag when they find the illegal weapons in your car. I made sure of that." My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. He had framed me. Every piece of paperwork he'd shoved into my bag, every oops moment where he'd left my keys in his coat, it was a trail of breadcrumbs leading straight to a colossal, life-altering sentence. My own husband had mapped out my destruction to ensure his own survival. "You monster," I whispered, the words barely audible over the high-pitched whine of the jet engines beginning to spool up. "I'm a survivor," Mark corrected, his hand reaching for his waistband, hidden by his jacket. I saw the telltale bulge of a holster. "And you are the best investment I ever made." Just as he reached down to grab my arm, a series of sharp, rhythmic pops echoed across the tarmac. It wasn't gunfire, it was the sound of heavy tires blowing out. The private jet lurched violently to the left, its landing gear collapsing under the sudden imbalance. Smoke began to pour from beneath the fuselage, and the pilot scrambled out of the cockpit, shouting in a foreign language. Mark lunged for me, but the sudden chaos caught him off guard. I took the opening, sprinting toward the airport's perimeter fence, not toward the hangar. My lungs were burning, my legs felt like lead, but I didn't dare look back. I reached the chain-link barrier and started to scramble up, my fingers tearing on the wire. Suddenly, a pair of rough, calloused hands grabbed me from the other side. I screamed, thinking it was Mark, but as I was hauled over the top and dropped onto the gravel on the other side, I looked up into the face of the airport cleaner. He wasn't wearing a uniform jacket anymore. Underneath, he wore a tactical vest, and he was holding a radio to his lips. "Target is in custody," he said calmly, then looked down at me with eyes that were cold and professional. "You're lucky you didn't step on that plane, Clara, but you're not out of the woods yet. We aren't the Internal Security Service." He pulled a set of zip ties from his belt, and I realized with a jolt of pure terror that I had jumped from the frying pan into an even hotter fire. "Who are you?" I gasped, trying to pull away. He leaned in close, his breath smelling of bitter coffee. "I'm the person who has been waiting for your husband's organized scheme to make a mistake for 3 years. And now You're the only witness left who can prove he's the mastermind behind the biggest shadow network in the state. Congratulations, Clara. You're our star witness, whether you like it or not." The transition from the frying pan into the fire was instantaneous. I wasn't being rescued. I was being harvested. As the man, who identified himself only as Agent Vane, dragged me toward an unmarked van, the sound of sirens began to wail in the distance. The airport was alive with activity now. Men in tactical gear swarmed the tarmac, surrounding the crippled jet. I saw Mark being pinned to the hot asphalt, his face pressed against the concrete, the arrogance drained from him to be replaced by the frantic, pathetic whining of a coward realizing his game was over. Vane shoved me into the back of the van and slammed the heavy door shut, sealing us in the semi-darkness. He didn't offer water or comfort. He simply clicked a digital recorder onto the dashboard. "You have one chance to walk away from this with your life, Clara. If you want to avoid an attempt to break your life with a heavy criminal charge, you give me everything. The documents in your bag, the names Mark whispered in his sleep, the location of his mother's safe houses. You provide the testimony, and we make you vanish into the witness protection program." I looked down at my hands. They were still shaking, stained with grease from the chain-link fence. My entire life had been demolished in less than 12 hours. The woman I had been yesterday, a woman who worried about home decor and petty in-law squabbles, was dead. In her place was a survivor who realized that the safe life I'd curated was nothing but a cage built by a criminal. "I don't want protection," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I want to watch." Vane raised an eyebrow. "Watch what?" "I want to watch the house of cards fall," I said, reaching for the bag Mark had forced upon me. I pulled out the folder I hadn't yet dared to open. Inside weren't just bank records. They were detailed logs of the group's operations, dates, times, and the signatures of the officials they'd bribed. It was the blueprint for their entire existence. My mother-in-law, Linda, wasn't just a bitter woman. She was the architect. She didn't tip off the authorities to hurt me. She was pruning her organization. She wanted Mark gone because he was getting sloppy, and she wanted me gone because I was a liability who was starting to ask questions. Vane's professional mask cracked, a flicker of genuine shock crossing his face. "You knew?" "I knew something was wrong," I whispered, opening the folder to reveal a handwritten note in the back. A hit order with my own name at the top dated 3 days ago. I just didn't know the extent of the cruelty. The next few months were a blur of cold rooms, interrogation lights, and the systematic dismantling of a power structure that had felt invincible. I became their shadow, the ghost in the machine. I testified against Linda in a closed-door hearing that lasted 14 hours. I watched as the organized scheme that had dictated my existence was systematically dismantled by the Internal Security Service. Every warehouse, every shell company, every corrupted official was stripped bare. The resolution wasn't a sudden burst of sunshine. It was the slow, quiet satisfaction of finality. Mark received an enormous term for his crimes, buried under the weight of the evidence I provided. Linda, realizing that the walls were closing in, attempted to flee the country, only to be intercepted at a private port by the very people she thought she had in her pocket. 6 months later, I sat on a porch overlooking a coastline I didn't recognize. The air was salt-heavy and clean. My name was no longer Clara. I had a new job, a new history, and for the first time, a silence that didn't feel threatening. The Internal Security Service kept their promise. They made me vanish. I leaned back, watching the waves roll in. I had lost a husband, a house, and a false sense of security, but I had gained the only thing that mattered: agency. I pulled my phone from my pocket, checked the encrypted feed one last time to ensure the final sentencing hearing was closed, and then, with a calm, steady hand, I powered it down and dropped it into the ocean. The past was at the bottom of the sea, and for the first time, the future was entirely my own.